I should have known something was wrong the moment I saw her name on my screen. Family meeting, 7:00 p.m. Mandatory attendance, no greeting, no. How are you? Just an order, like I was an employee summoned to a performance review. That's how it always was with my mother. Cold, precise, efficient. I sat in my car for 10 whole minutes before I even rang the doorbell. The house I grew up in loomed in front of me, pristine as ever. The house boasted immaculate white walls, manicured hedges. A Mercedes parked neatly in the driveway, my sister's, no doubt. It gleamed like a badge of status, a reminder that in this family, success was currency, and mine wasn't the kind they respected. I had chosen a different path: art, sustainability. I lead a hands-on life filled with reclaimed wood, stained glass, and long nights in my studio. In their eyes, it was playing dress-up with garbage. The door opened before I even touched the bell. "You're late," my mother said, lips pressed into a line so thin it looked drawn on. I glanced at my watch, 6:58 p.m. Right. I was 2 minutes early. But in this house, even being on time was considered an offense. She stepped aside and I walked into the living room that still smelled like control, leather polish, expensive perfume, and secrets. They were already waiting. Rebecca, the oldest, perched on the edge of the couch like she was in court. Her leather briefcase rested beside her, of course. Apparently, even a family ambush required legal documentation. Lucas, my older brother, still in his doctor's scrubs, arms folded like a judge about to pass sentence. Daniel, the youngest, a tech startup golden boy, didn't even look up from his phone. And then there was my father. He stood by the fireplace like a general at the head of a losing war. He remained still and stern. "Sit down, Savannah," he said. There was one chair. The chair was positioned to face them all. Not beside, not among, opposite. I sat slowly, spine straight, eyes steady. "What is this issue about?" I asked, though I already knew. Rebecca opened her briefcase with a soft click and pulled out a thick stack of papers. "We've made a decision," she said. "It's about the family's reputation and business. It's in the best interest of the Sinclair legacy," my mother added, now sitting beside Lucas like he was the family heir apparent. I took the papers. The legal jargon blurred together, but I didn't need to read every word. Just a few words were enough. The decision was made to terminate the familial association. The process involves the forfeiture of inheritance rights, severance of financial ties. A slow, bitter laugh slipped out of me. "You're disowning me." I looked at each of them. I was daring them to deny the truth. Daniel spoke without looking up. "It's not personal. It's just business. Business. Right. I'm your sister." "You were," Lucas said coldly. "Now you're a liability. That so-called job of yours," my father began, "is an embarrassment," Rebecca finished. "It reflects poorly on the family brand." My fingers clenched around the paper. This wasn't the first time I'd felt their judgment. The sighs, the silence, the subtle digs left a lasting impression. But this was final. My mother leaned forward. "We gave you everything, Savannah. The best education. You made the best connections. And you threw it all away to play with paint." I took a deep breath, forcing the storm inside me to stay quiet. "Where do I sign?" She blinked. She seemed to have anticipated tears, rage, pleading. Not calm. "Savannah," I said. "Where?" Rebecca hesitated, then pointed. I took the pen. My hand didn't shake. After 10 minutes, it was complete. As I stood, I felt something strange in my chest. Not heaviness. Lightness. It felt as though the last chain had finally snapped. "I hope you understand," my father said. "This is for the family's future." I looked at him one last time. "You were always afraid I'd ruin the family name," I said. "But none of you ever bothered to find out what I was building, or who I've become." My mother opened her mouth to speak, but I held up a hand. "You cut me off. Now you'll live with that choice." I walked to the door. I manually opened the door, closed it softly. He spoke too softly for the weight of what had just happened. Outside, the sky was turning dark, but for the first time in years, I could breathe. I drove home in silence, tears falling without permission. But they didn't mean I was weak. They meant I was finally free to start again, I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the floor of my tiny studio apartment, knees to my chest, staring at the signed papers on the table like they were radioactive. Disowned. No inheritance. There is no family name. There is no safety net. I thought I'd feel panic, maybe regret, but all I felt was an overwhelming emptiness, and beneath it, a strange flicker of relief. They'd finally said out loud what they'd been implying for years. I wasn't part of their world. And now I didn't have to pretend to be. My studio wasn't much. It was a converted warehouse with cracked concrete floors, mismatched furniture, and the faint smell of sawdust and varnish that never left the air. To most people, it looked like chaos. To me, it was home. My workshop sat at the back, sunlight streaming through dusty skylights, hitting half-finished sculptures, piles of reclaimed wood, coils of copper wire, and boxes of broken glass I'd collected from demolition sites. This was my real inheritance, not money. It's more than just a name. There was a vision, calloused hands, and an eye that could see beauty in what others had thrown away. Vision Lena showed up the next morning with 2 coffees and fire in her eyes. They did what? I didn't look up from the slab of maple I was sanding. Cut me off. Officially. Paper signed. She stared at me like I'd told her I'd joined a cult. And you just let them? What was I supposed to do? Beg? I don't know. Maybe scream? Flip a table? Hire a hitman? I let out a dry laugh. Why waste the energy? If they wanted me gone so badly, I just gave them what they wanted. Lena set the coffee down harder than necessary. You're stronger than they deserve, Sav. She was right. But that didn't mean it didn't hurt. The days that followed blurred together. I threw myself into work. I stayed up past midnight carving intricate patterns into scrap wood. I broke old wine bottles and fused the glass into mosaics. I burned my hands shaping metal into chairs. No one had ordered. It wasn't about profit. It was about not feeling the ache. Because every pause, my mind was drawn back to that living room, the room, her eyes. And by the way, no one hesitated. Ethan, my third business partner and unofficial hype man, burst into the workshop one afternoon carrying a box of salvaged brass hinges and a 3D printed prototype. Are you working or spiraling? Same thing, I muttered. Good. Use it. Channel the rage. Rage sells. I chuckled. He wasn't wrong. Our online store had a modest following, mostly eco-conscious interior designers and niche boutiques. But I think our actions increased our brand visibility. Think bigger. Our last 2 pieces had sold out in under 24 hours. This increased our brand visibility. I still had no money. I ate instant noodles 3 nights in a row. I walked instead of taking the subway. I rationed paint like it was gold. But I never stopped creating. No matter how small the orders were, every piece I made was proof. I didn't need them. One night, I found myself standing alone in the center of my studio, surrounded by works in progress, glass lamps, driftwood tables, and copper-framed mirrors. And I whispered aloud, to no one, "This is real. I made this. We did not use their money for this. We did not seek their approval for this. I am using my hands. I am in pain. I have persevered with my grit. I didn't know then that everything was about to change, that my work would soon be seen, that my name would be printed where none of theirs had ever been. But I did know this. I had survived. And survival, I was learning, was the most powerful kind of revenge. I was in the middle of assembling a reclaimed oak coffee table when Ethan came crashing through the studio door like a human thunderstorm. Savannah! I didn't even look up. If it's another cracked order from the California client, I swear. No, he gasped. It's not a complaint. It's, holy shot, just look. He shoved his laptop in front of me. I squinted, wiping sawdust from my fingers before focusing on the screen. The young artist transforming sustainable interior design. Meet Savannah Sinclair, Living in Style magazine. I blinked. Once. Twice. I thought it was a prank. Did you submit this? No, Ethan laughed, nearly vibrating with excitement. They found us through our Instagram. Apparently one of your mosaic headboards went viral. I stared at the photo beneath the headline. It was my face. The scene took place in my studio. I am holding a chisel, surrounded by stained glass and copper wiring. Me, Not the disappointment, not the embarrassment, just me. What was the word that most resonated with me? Artist. They hadn't called me a crafter or hobbyist. They had called me what I truly was. By the end of the day, the article had been shared over 10,000 times. Interior design blogs picked it up. Sustainable living influencers reposted it. Even Business Forward, the most respected business magazine in the country, shared the story on its social media. But the moment that nearly stopped my heart? An email? Subject? Business Forward cover shoot proposal? I read it 3 times before I believed it. They didn't just want to feature me. They wanted me on the cover, Ethan screamed. Lena cried. I just sat there, stunned, my fingers frozen on the keyboard. Savannah, Lena whispered, sitting beside me. Do you understand what the phrase means? I shook my head, too overwhelmed to speak. It means you're no longer proving anything to anyone, she said. You've arrived. The next few weeks moved like a dream. Our workshop went from barely surviving to completely overwhelmed. Orders flooded in from boutique hotels in Europe, art galleries in New York, and even a luxury brand in Japan that wanted a full installation. We had to hire extra staff. We ran out of inventory. We moved into a bigger space. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't asking permission. I wasn't trying to fit in. I was leading the way. Hoot came. Something else. My phone started buzzing with names I hadn't seen in months. Dad, Rebecca, Lucas brief messages. Polite, formal, call me. We need to talk. Can you come by? No apologies. No explanations. The tone was the same as always, as if I still owed them my time, my presence, and my obedience. But I didn't reply. Now, I was the one in control. I always knew this day might come, the day they'd realize they had made a mistake. But I had imagined it differently. Anger, pride, vengeance. Instead, what I felt was clarity. They weren't reaching out because they missed me. They were reaching out because they needed me at that moment. And this time, if they wanted access to me, to my life, to my legacy, they'd have to earn it. It started with a text from my father. We are having dinner at home. Dinner is at 7:00 p.m. on Sunday. The whole family will be there. We need to talk, Dad. Number. How are you? No, I'm sorry. It was just another command, as if nothing had ever happened. But this time, he added one word I hadn't seen from him in years. Sweetheart. I stared at the message for a long time. I could hear his voice in my head, calm and authoritative, like always. It seemed as though uttering these words softly would nullify the memory of a year ago when he had looked me in the eye and abruptly removed me from his life. But now, something was different. The action wasn't a power move. This wasn't control. The sensation felt like fear. I typed a single word back, okay. I didn't arrive early. I didn't bake a cake like I used to. I didn't bring a bottle of wine. I didn't worry about what I was wearing. I showed up at 7:00 p.m. exactly, dressed in a sharp navy blazer, heels clicking against their perfect marble steps. The house looked exactly the same, pristine white paint, trimmed hedges. The same Mercedes is glinting in the driveway. It all looked untouched, as if the betrayal had never happened. But when my mother opened the door, something had changed. Her eyes, they were puffy, red. Her voice was softer, almost unsure. Savannah, you're here. Yes, I said simply. I didn't hug her. I didn't smile. I just walked past her and stepped into the living room where, once again, they were all waiting. The situation is exactly the same as last year, but this time I didn't feel small. Rebecca sat perfectly poised, her hands folded over her lap, lips tight like she was about to negotiate a high-stakes trial. Lucas looked stiff in his suit, his phone clenched in his hand like a shield. Daniel didn't even bother to hide his nerves, tapping his foot nonstop. My father stood near the fireplace, same as before, but he looked older now, smaller. It seemed as though time had finally caught up with him. I took my seat, not in the isolated chair this time, but wherever I wanted. So? I said, crossing my arms. What's this discussion about? There was a heavy silence. Then Rebecca cleared her throat. Our company is in trouble? I blinked. That was fast. I figured, I said. The car company, right? Lucas nodded. The industry's changing too fast. We didn't adapt. The loans are now collapsing, and investors are pulling out. My father exhaled slowly, his pride barely holding on. We have less than 60 days before we lose everything. I leaned back in my chair, watching them squirm, and let me guess. Now you want me to save you. Nobody denied it. No one even tried. My mother finally spoke. Savannah, your name is everywhere. Your work, your company, you have the kind of recognition that could help us rebuild. I laughed softly. You mean the reputation you said was shameful? The job you mocked? The career you disowned me for? We were wrong, my mother whispered. I let the silence stretch. It felt good, not out of revenge, but because for the first time, they were listening. So, I said carefully, if you want my help, we do this my way. No assumptions, no privilege, no more fake apologies. My father's jaw tightened. And what does that mean exactly? I stood up, walking slowly to the center of the room. It means next time we talk, it'll be in a public place. We will be on neutral ground. There will be no need for family chairs. No more ambushes. Just business. Their silence was my answer. I'll text you the time and place. And without another word, I turned and walked out the same door they once shut behind me. As I stepped into the night, the air felt lighter. The stars above looked the same, but I had changed. For the first time, they needed me, and they knew it. But the question was, would I ever truly need them again? I chose the Langston, an elegant, exclusive restaurant tucked inside a glass tower overlooking the city. My family used to frequent this place, inviting me to their celebrations back then. It was a place where they would respectfully nod at waiters and order wine as if they owned the vineyard. But this time, I wasn't the outsider watching from the edge of the table. I was the one they were coming to see. I arrived exactly at 7:00 p.m., not early, not apologetically. It was just right on time. The hostess greeted me by name. Good evening, Miss Sinclair. The private room is ready. The chef has prepared a custom menu for you as requested. As I walked past the velvet curtains in the private dining room, I saw them already seated, for once, waiting for me. My mother sat with her hands folded tightly on her lap, knuckles white. Dressed in her usual power suit, Rebecca had a folder of papers beside her. Lucas and Daniel tried to look composed, but the nervous tapping of Daniel's foot gave him away. And my father, the once imposing patriarch, stood as I entered, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Savannah. Dad, I said, nodding. Everyone, I took my seat at the head of the table. No one spoke. They were waiting for me to begin. So I did. Let's not pretend this is a family dinner, I said. We're here for business. So let's talk terms. My father cleared his throat. We need investment, leadership. A fresh face can revive investor confidence. You have all of that now. I tilted my head slightly. Funny. A year ago, I had none of that, according to you. Rebecca leaned forward. We can't change the past, Savannah, but we can move forward. I looked around the table. The same people who once said I was an embarrassment. They were now clinging to me like a life raft. I let the silence stretch before I spoke again. All right, here's how this procedure works. I pulled a small folder from my bag and slid it across the table. If you want my involvement, we're building. We're rebranding. To what? Lucas asked, confused. Sinclair Electric, I said clearly. Sinclair Electric is a sustainable electric car company. We focus on innovation, environmental responsibility, and design. That's not who we are, Daniel scoffed. It's who I am, I replied. And if you want me, you want my vision. Rebecca opened the folder and began reading the proposal inside. Her expression shifted from skeptical to stunned. You want 51% ownership? She said. Correct. And the CEO position? Also correct. My father frowned. You'll be the head of the company? Not just the head, I said. The decision maker. Full executive control. No interference from anyone. What about me? He asked quietly. I looked at him, then nodded once. You'll be named honorary advisor. A figurehead. However, there were no votes cast. No veto. Lucas opened his mouth to protest, but I raised a hand. There's more. I pointed to the next section. Everyone's shares are based on real contributions. There will be no more privileges based on bloodline. No effort, no equity. Silence fell. It was the kind of silence that usually comes after an earthquake. My mother's lips parted. Savannah, one more thing, I said, my voice unwavering. If we accomplish this, no one will ever refer to me as a disappointment again. There will be no more feelings of shame. There will be no more whispered judgments. You don't get to erase me from the family tree when it's convenient and then pin medals on me when I'm useful. I looked at each of them. You disowned me. Now, if you want me back, it's on my terms. No one moved. No one spoke. Then, after what felt like an eternity, my father reached for the folder. He didn't argue. He didn't negotiate. He simply said, "Hand me a pen." The deal was done. My signature dried on paper. They never imagined I'd author it. Sinclair Auto was no more. Sinclair Electric had been born. But just 2 days later, something else happened. Something I never saw coming. It was a rainy afternoon in the studio. I was carefully fitting pieces of stained glass into a metal frame when Ethan burst through the door, soaked and panting like he'd run from across the city. "Savannah?" he gasped. "You need to sit down." "I'm working," I muttered, not even looking up. "No, seriously, you need to sit down." He set his laptop on the table. An email appeared on the screen. From the Museum of Modern Art MoMA subject, Artist Invitation Feature Exhibition. I froze. I read it once, twice. Then again, they wanted my work. They were looking for more than just a display. To feature me, Savannah Sinclair, the disappointment, the crafter, now. An artist invited by MoMA. I leaned back in my chair, barely breathing. For years, I had scraped together pieces of wood, metal, and dignity to build something out of nothing. Now that nothing had become art, real art, respected art. But the higher you rise, the more the past tries to find you. The next day, my phone buzzed again. "Lucas, Mom's been crying a lot. Dad too, can you come see them?" I didn't respond. A few hours later, "Rebecca, Savannah, I know we were wrong, but please, Mom really needs you." Still, I stayed silent. I thought I'd built a wall strong enough. Nothing could topple it. But that afternoon, a letter arrived, handwritten. I received this gift from my father. I held it in my hands like it was radioactive. Then, I opened it. "Savannah, I've written and torn up this letter more times than I can count. There's no version that makes what we did okay. You have always been the strongest member of this family. Isn't due to success. This phenomenon isn't due to a desire for fame. That's because you had the courage to be yourself when no one supported you. I see that now. I know I don't deserve a second chance. But if you're willing, I'd be grateful for the opportunity to make things right, Dad." My hands trembled as I folded the letter back into the envelope. I didn't cry, but I felt something shift inside. For the first time, there was no lecture, no excuse, just truth. And that, somehow, cut deeper than all the shame ever had. I spent the night pacing. The moment wasn't about business anymore. That conversation was about healing. But I'd made myself a promise: never go back without your terms. So the next morning, I sent a single message: "We'll talk. This time, it's under my conditions." The meeting happened somewhere none of us expected. I am in a hospital room. The doctor admitted my mother the previous night due to stress and exhaustion. I walked in and saw her pale face, her trembling fingers reaching out. "You came," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. I nodded, but I didn't speak, not yet. Outside her room, the others were waiting: Rebecca, Lucas, Daniel, and my father. I opened my briefcase. I took out a folder and set it on the table. "If I help you," I said, "these are the conditions." No one interrupted. They didn't dare. First, Sinclair Auto is dead. We're building something new: Sinclair Electric. We are a clean energy company with recycled design at its core. Showrooms will double as art galleries. Lucas frowned. "Art? In a car showroom?" I met his eyes. "Yes, the world has undergone significant changes. And if you want to survive, you have to change too." "And who's in charge?" Rebecca asked, though she already knew. I slid the document forward. "Me. CEO, 51% ownership. They have full decision-making power. No interference. The interference did not come from Dad. It didn't come from anyone else. She inhaled sharply. However, my work was not yet complete. Dad gets the title of honorary advisor. The rest of you will own shares based on actual contributions, not your last name. The room stayed quiet until finally, my father nodded. That's fair. I studied him. He looked tired, but not resistant, just ready. And one final condition, I said. I paused, my voice low but unwavering. No one ever calls me a disappointment again. There are no more whispers. I am no longer ashamed. If we do this, then you acknowledge the truth. I was never the problem. You were. Silence. Then, slowly. Rebecca looked up. You're right. Lucas lowered his gaze. We were blind. Daniel nodded. I'm sorry. Finally, my father picked up the pen. He didn't say a word. He didn't try to explain. He just signed. One by one, they all followed. And in that moment, I knew. I wasn't just reclaiming a place in the family. I was rebuilding it on my terms. 1 year later, I walked through the glass doors of Sinclair Electric, not as the forgotten daughter. However, I am the CEO of the company. The once rigid halls of Sinclair Auto had undergone a complete transformation. The sterile, outdated design had vanished. In its place, open space, natural light, textures of reclaimed wood and sculpted metal, and walls that displayed more than sales charts. They displayed art, my art. And not just mine, we invited local eco-artists to collaborate on every showroom across the country. A curated exhibition accompanied each vehicle launch. Each model, named Copperwind, Driftline, and Obsidian, honored the materials used in its construction. We weren't just selling cars, we were selling a message. Sustainability is strength. Innovation is beauty. Reinvention is power. Rebecca became our chief legal officer. She left the courtroom, trading her constant war with clients for something more meaningful. She actually smiled now. Lucas surprised everyone. He spearheaded the launch of our electric medical fleet, ambulances powered by clean energy, developed in partnership with hospitals nationwide. I saw in his eyes the pride I'd always wished he'd had. Only this time, it wasn't forced. Daniel, who was once detached from you, is now obsessed with battery innovation. His research cut charge time in half. He said it felt good to build something real. And my father? He remained our honorary advisor. He didn't interfere. He watched. He learned. And, most days, he listened. One evening, we gathered at my art studio, the same dusty space where it all began. The same space they once thought was a phase is now their reality. A waste. A disgrace. Now, it was our meeting place. I placed a small wooden box on the table. Inside, the original disownment papers. Still signed. Still legal. Rebecca stared at them. You kept them? I nodded. This is not for revenge. For this moment. Lucas looked over. What do we do with them? I reached for the lighter beside me. We burned them. No one stopped me. We placed each page in the kiln, the same as my first mosaic table. We watched the flames reduce every last signature, every line of legal betrayal, to ash. When it was done, I gathered the soft gray remains into a shallow dish. Then I reached for a glowing rod of molten glass and whispered, let's turn it into something beautiful. Under my hands, the sculpture took form. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't cement. The shape was abstract, twisted, and intertwined, reflecting the real, the messy truth of what family truly is. Fragile, strong, broken, reforged. When it cooled, I placed it on a pedestal in the center of Sinclair Electric's flagship showroom. A plaque beneath it read, Rebirth created from the ashes of the past. Dedicated to every legacy worth rebuilding. My mother stood before it that night, tears glistening in her eyes. It's beautiful, she whispered. So are second chances, I said. She took my hand, this time, not out of guilt. However, I do so with gratitude. The grand opening of Sinclair Electric's third branch was more than just another milestone. It was a statement. It was a celebration of everything we had rebuilt, not just the company, but ourselves. The new showroom shimmered under strings of warm lights. Sleek electric vehicles stood beside handcrafted sculptures. Walls of recycled glass reflected beams from chandeliers made from salvaged engine parts. Every detail carried a message. We had turned ruin into purpose. There has been a breakdown of trust and innovation. They transformed their pain into art. The crowd was full of investors, journalists, influencers, and even former critics, the same ones who once wrote off Sinclair Auto as a relic of the past. Now they stood, drinks in hand, marveling at our reinvention. I stepped onto the small stage in the center of the room. The spotlight hit my face, but this time I didn't shrink from it. I embraced it. A year ago, I began. This company was on the verge of collapse. But today, we're not just surviving, we're leading. The room remained silent. I looked directly at the front row, where my family stood, no longer behind me, but beside me. We believed in something others dismissed. You can rebuild broken things. A name does not define your worth. That family isn't about perfection. It's about choosing to grow together. Applause erupted. But it wasn't just for the company, it was for the journey. And for the first time, I let myself feel it. Not pride, not vengeance, but peace. After the event, we gathered in the courtyard beneath a sculpture I had made from the ashes of our past, the one I called Rebirth. Rebecca stood beside me, sipping her wine. This time, you really won. I smiled softly. It's not about winning, I said. It's about choosing right, even when it hurts. Lucas was showing the latest medical vehicle prototype to a group of hospital directors. Daniel was explaining our new battery line to a cluster of engineers. My father was quiet, standing before the sculpture, hands in his pockets, his gaze thoughtful. He turned to me. It took me too long to see your worth, he said. But now I know you never had to prove anything. I did. I gave him a small smile. You already have. As the night came to a close, I stood alone in the showroom for a moment. The lights, the glass, the silence. It wasn't cold anymore. It was mine. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the final reminder of who I used to be, the old name tag, the one that once labeled me family disappointment. I looked at it. Then slowly, I placed it in the gallery display box beneath Rebirth, not to forget, but to honor the transformation. The journey went from being discarded to being defined. He transitioned from oblivion to regeneration. Now, when people ask me if I've forgiven my family, I say this. I forgave them the moment I stopped needing their approval. I don't carry hate. I carry freedom, because the most powerful choice I ever made, the choice was mine. Savannah's story isn't just about family or betrayal or business. It's about reclaiming your worth and daring to build a life where you don't just belong, you lead. Have you ever had to walk away to truly find yourself? Tell me in the comments. And don't forget to follow this channel for more stories about resilience, reinvention, and rising stronger.